Hi friends, and good morning. We are beginning here with the Egoic Lotus Webinar Commentary number 5, and I thought I was going to get immediately into the stages of adaptation, but I realized that there is more in this section from page 200 to 214 of Esoteric Psychology, which is relevant to preparing for our subject. As you know, I'm attempting to go through these, at least some of these preparatory reference areas, because they do lay the foundation for the type of correlation which has to be made as we pull all the information on the Egoic Lotus together. The part that will be most exhaustive, and hopefully not exhausting, is the qualities of the petals in detail and their colors. Those are the two areas which are really important to discuss. But that will come along in due time. So now, going on here, we have finished discussing the 10 types of souls, all the way from those who are utterly dormant and asleep up to the masters of the wisdom. And DK says we don't need to go higher than that, and that they all, that there's a broad generalization when looking at these classifications of human beings, and that they shade into each other in a bewildering way. Overlapping. The varieties of intermediate types are myriad, but this analysis will serve as a skeleton structure upon which to build, and we've been attempting a little building, looking at each one of these 10 types and realizing that they are in a way multiple. And when we talk about the beginning of the particular type, it's not necessarily the same as at the end, and there are also in between stages, as I pointed out, I think between group number 5, which was the bulk of our humanity and was still quite emotionally polarized, though could use the mind intelligently on occasion, and group number 6, which were already the creative thinkers. I think there's a stage in between there. And when we are applying this to the people, we know we have to be careful, not to pigeonhole them. We have to understand that there are all degrees of variety in the process, and that everybody really is an individual in terms of their development. But it is certainly possible to see more or less where they are focused. We get on to, let's see, maybe I'll make this a little, we get on to point number 7, and it says, in the development of the race at this time, we can now study the types, the qualities of these souls, the apparatus of response. Of course, the qualities will be stored in the causal body, but will manifest through the personality, as those qualities do tend to show up in how we demonstrate ourselves in the 3 lower worlds. So the qualities of these souls, the apparatus of response which they must use, and which is constructed and has reached a certain stage of development according to their inner development, and the nature of the mechanism of contact which they have constructed over many thousands and even millions of years in order to enable them to function in the world as we know it today. So we could say we begin with a study of the personality and work our way inward. Science and religion together are producing that latest of the sciences we call psychology. For this the time is now ripe, and as DK discussed psychology in his book that he was offering in the 1930s, he says, well, it's kind of hit a cul-de-sac. It's not really going anywhere, and the esoteric psychology is definitely needed. And of course, psychology has grown by leaps and bounds in those last 80 years. So we do have the fourth force psychology, transpersonal psychology, But we also have the beginning of fifth force psychology, I'd like to call it, and this is what we're dealing with now, which has a certain energy specificity based upon the rays and based upon esoteric astrology. So the fifth ray is going to unite here with the second and the fourth. There is a certain master P, as in Polydorus, who is apparently responsible for the psychology movement in the world today. It's very much a second-ray science in terms of its therapeutic aspects. And when we look at the highest method of teaching for the different types of rays, Ray 5 has esoteric psychology as its highest method of teaching. So this is very much a combination of the second, fourth, and fifth rays that we are here working on. Okay, so, and as stated, we observe the human being, and from those observations, we can tell so much about what the inner development really is. Eventually, we'll be able to look within and tell with exactitude, and not with just some vague impressions, what the inner development of the causal body actually is. This is probably only possible to those psychics who are really masters of the wisdom at this time. All these, this is point 8 now, all these manifesting souls have come forth from some source at some time in their cyclic expressions, and we can say other planets include such sources, or are included in such sources. This to the, planets, as I've mentioned, such as Venus, Jupiter, Mercury, also Vulcan, and maybe others, but those are the ones that immediately come to mind as having human beings who are representative of them. And maybe they were, in fact, either individualized on those planets, or in many cases are monads from those planets who took their individualization at some time in the Earth scheme. And I'm wondering if maybe some of the Mercurians were individualized in the earlier chain, the moon chain. I know a lot of Venusians and Jupiterians, according to the references here, seem to have been individualized in our fourth chain. As to Vulcanians, they seem to have been individualized at a former time and have entered at a late date, with petal number 1 and 3 open, but not petal number 2, and so they've come in as open, semi-open lotuses. So this, to the modern thinker, is purely speculative and can be regarded probably unprofitable. It may also be interesting, but is presumably imaginative. Well, that's the thing about imagination. Our elevated teachers give us a certain recounting of planetary history and of human development, which are far beyond the ken and not even imagined by most advanced thinkers. We have the choice of whether we will accept what they say as at least as a working hypothesis, or whether we will just reject it as fanciful and continue to follow the ways that lesser minds propose to us as correct. I know what I'd rather do, and I trust I know what you'd rather do too. May I say here that the occultist regards all the above affirmative statements as constituting an exact and proven science. But that's, of course, the true occultist, one that, the true occultist, one that can actually see, one that has those faculties developed, not just astral faculties, but the higher faculties, which can really reveal. So they regard all the above as affirmative statements, the above affirmative statements as constituting an exact and proven science. Very much the fifth ray involved here, but the area, of course, of that science is not what science usually considers. We're pretty well confining ourselves with science to the etheric physical plane. Okay, but as being presented in symbolic form for the consideration of the minds of men. So the true knowledge of what the soul really is in a fifth ray manner, as will be later discovered, and I think in the technique of integration for the fifth ray, the understanding of the soul in a very technical manner is brought about, well, these things are not yet really available to us. Esotericists and theosophists, who are not necessarily the true occultists, would do well to remember this and to realize that their divisions and groupings, their affirmations and statements about occult teaching, and their pronouncements as to time and place are largely symbolical and must be thus considered. So we have enough to bring us into rapport with the facts, but let's just say we do not have the exact facts expressed in new scientific terminology. Okay. So, we sometimes become a little dogmatic about these things, and now we're led here to believe that our pronouncements are placed in other than exact terms and are symbolical in nature and simply point to the truth while not being the exact truth. Okay, these are facts that he wants us to keep in mind as we approach this study of the Egoic Lotus. If you think about it, the Egoic Lotus is really all about the science of psychology. It's about the unfoldment of the human being over a vast historical period. So reading here in Esoteric Psychology is very valuable. The process whereby the soul nature and the form nature meet and blend is termed individualization. We kind of wonder what was the soul nature before there was individualization. We know what the form nature was, and we can just say the soul nature was the higher triad and even the monad. I include the monad actually in the soul nature because it has consciousness, and consciousness is soul. But what we do create then is an egoic vehicle upon the higher mental plane, and that is the vehicle which interacts with the form nature, which is now impregnated with the presence of this higher vehicle. So here are some definitions. Individualization is the emergence of the soul, because our consciousness is really soul consciousness, and ultimately it's even monadic consciousness. I don't mean the fullness of monadic consciousness. I simply mean that that's where that's who is at home. That's the perceiver. The monad is always the perceiver. Individualization is the emergence of the soul upon the path of outgoing through the medium of the form, and it's dealing with many objective impressions. It has not turned around and come to itself. It does not think of what it really is as a perceiving being. It is occupied and really preoccupied with that which the world of matter form presents. Thus, through the use of a form, expression in the three worlds becomes possible, and this expression is a redemptive act, isn't it? I mean, there are leftover beings, so to speak, and types of energy from a previous solar system, and they have not yet acclimated or adjusted to the program of the present system. There's a cleavage there because they are operating according to different laws. And what we have to do is make it possible for these beings, conditioned by the third ray, especially in a general sense, to adjust and adapt and become aligned with and impregnated by and directed by energies and patterns which relate to the second ray of of the soul of our planet and of our solar system. Initiation is the process whereby a soul, having exhausted the resources of form life and therefore wanting no more of it in its desire nature, and having thus achieved mastery and expression, progressively returns to its source. Of course, complete mastery is not there yet, is it? The complete mastery of that form is occurring by the fifth initiation, the master of the three worlds. But with each progressive initiation, there is a degree of increasing control and competence achieved. So one begins to look in a different direction one is no longer finding one's desires, which are ever for more, met in the three worlds of lower evolution, or the three lower worlds of evolution, and so one begins to turn inward. And the desire then directs the consciousness inward to its source. This the soul does through the medium of 5 stages, steps or initiations, which are the correspondence in the interior life of the soul to the 5 stages whereby expression is developed in the strictly human race. So there are always these numerical parallels. We're only talking about 5 initiations. There are more, of course, but when dealing with the human being as human being is presently constituted, it's quite enough to mention the 5 initiations. So on the path of expression or outgoing, we will have the Lemurian stage passing through the Atlantean, which is more the emotional stage, and the Aryan, and so on to the final 2 final races upon our planet in this world cycle, which will be the 6th root race and the 7th root race. We don't really have names for them yet, but we know that the 6th root race will be a race of intuition, generally speaking, and the 7th root race a ray of will, generally speaking. We don't count the Adamic and Hyperborean pre-Lemurian races in which the human being is not yet individualized and is passing through forms which we might now consider to be very strange and which are discussed in the secret doctrine. Even the early Lemurian race is not yet individualized, though massive, apparently, and very quite concrete, apparently. So we have here then the preparation, the outgoing, well, let's just call it that, individualization, representing, come on now, the path of outgoing, and initiation, representing the path of incoming, the path of incoming, reorientation. In connection with individualization, the following points should be remembered, and this is maybe some of the things that will be of value to us as we study the Egoic Lotus. Individualization upon the moon chain took place in the 5th race of the 3rd round, and this, of course, was on the 3rd globe. Well, it's really on the 4th globe of the 5th of the 3rd chain. We usually think about individualization in terms of our own chain and our own 4th globe, but the moon globe, whatever its mysterious history and fate, was the 4th globe of that particular chain, and presumably what we're talking about here is the 5th race of the in the 3rd round, but in the 4th globe as the 3rd round passes through it. This is, he's definitely leaving some information out here. We can speculate, though, that it did take place upon the moon chain and was a physical act taking place upon the material globe. Now, in Lemurian days, individualization took place because it was the 3rd root race and the 4th round. And this is interesting, the word because. He could have just said it took place at that time, but it seems that the number 3 is much involved in creating these forms, the personality form and the form of the Egoic Lotus. Now, we know that there were no solar angels acting as they do now, at least, upon the moon chain. The growth of the creation of the Egoic Lotus was something that occurred through upward aspiring animal man of that period, and the powers of the monad. There was no intervention, at least of the kind we have, of the solar angels to create an egoic lotus, which they substanded and which they supported, and to the growth of which they contributed. In Lemurian days, of course, there was the coming of the solar angels. So we're talking about, again, this is the third root race, we want to say, of the fourth globe and of the fourth round. It seems to be progressive. We have the third round moving to the fourth round, and we have the not the fifth race, but the third race. I suppose all of these numbers really have something to do in the plan of the planetary logos, but we can see that there was not so much of the love quality, because the numbers 3 and 5 are mentioned in relation to individualization on the moon chain. But in Lemurian days, we do have the number 4 in terms of the fourth round, and since our chain and our globe are more responsive to the 2-4-6 line, we do have those beings who are very representative of the Buddhic force coming in to assist. It wasn't so purely a mental act as it appears to be on the moon chain. In Atlantis, the door of initiation was opened, and forced initiation became the objective of the best of the human family. And my friend Philip Lindsay, who is really the scholar on these things, I think he is talking about initiation being particularly concentrated in the fourth root race, fifth sub-race of the Atlantean history, of the Atlantean root race. Okay. You can read his wonderful book, The Hidden History of Humanity, HHH, and you'll get a much vaster idea of how this occurred. So in Atlantis, the door of initiation opened, and interestingly enough, the door into the animal kingdom was largely shut. And forced initiation, and we are still engaged in forced initiation, and not just that long, slow process whereby humanity achieves initiatory levels. Okay, so forced initiation became the objective of the cream, the best of the human family. Those who could or can is interesting, because he's bringing it into even our modern age now. Thus become initiates are the lights which ever radiate. And remember the radiant lotuses? We discussed them. So that's first initiation. And when we become the first degree initiate, our light begins to shine forth in a dark place, but only begins, of course. And later the radiance increases. But radiation is found right there at the first degree, and you can think about how the seventh ray and the radiatory planet Uranus are both involved in that first degree. In Lemurian days, it was the light that ever burn that came into being, and I think a lower form of fire was displayed. But still, they were first-degree initiates of their own kind, even though, well, you kind of wonder whether it was the great monastic initiations that were offered at that time. I think to some it may have been, but in Atlantis we began to get the true monastic initiations, interestingly enough, and in Lemurian days there may have been earlier types of initiations which were bringing together the etheric and the dense physical vehicle, and by the burning we can sense the act of purification here. With burning, the act of purification is sensed. But that is really interesting, because we're not talking about burning lotuses right now, are we? When we talk about initiations in our particular period, we're talking about the radiant type of lotuses, which can take that first degree. So the purification of the form was very, very strong, and other kinds of initiations were offered, and even now are offered. There are some initiations which are simply considered preliminary or minor, and several kinds of them. And Master DK discusses them in connection with the opening of the first tier of petals, and even with some of the work that is done in the second tier of petals before the definite opening of the fifth, which signals, at least as I understand it, the beginning of the great monastic initiations, which we call, for instance, the birth of the Christ in the heart, or the baptism, or the transfiguration, and so forth. All right, so in our race, we find eventually, I guess, the lights which ever shine. This is the individualization of the sixth race types. Oh, interesting. Who came in the second round. How did they come in? They must have been latent for a long time. So there will be, I guess, individualization. Well, in our race, maybe is he seeming to say that there is individualization occurring in our race as well? This seems to be the implication. Well, I'll just ask the question: is there individualization occurring in our race as well? The sixth race types, or will this be the individualization within the sixth root race? All right, that is a little bit enigmatic still to me, and needs to be worked out. But I like the contrast between burning, let's put them down, burning, radiating, and shining. Now, here we have, in Atlantean days, the best who could or can thus become initiate. So that word can brings it into the present tense, which is even now the Aryan race. And radiation seems to be an important type of dynamic found in our modern science and in the Aryan race in general. But the shining forth, well, it begins to look like the third degree, and that the third degree will be more easily achieved. I'm thinking of the dynamic of revelation, no express reveal is the third degree, and the shining is having to do with the great revelation. So the question remains in my mind here, whether there were human beings who were in a state of latency. See, we don't, coming in the second round, maybe they were supervised by solar angels at that time, but were not individualized, and stayed in a certain state of latency awaiting their individualization. But it seems that this individualization is occurring in relation to the fifth root race, which is certainly not over yet, and in relation to the sixth root race, which is impending. So maybe this is an individualization yet to come of certain beings that are awaiting that, and will have a very different type of history. See, one could gloss over this kind of statement and say, oh, well, yeah, the lights that ever shine, and go on, without really even attempting to understand it. But as I look at it, I see there's a lot to understand. I mean, we still seem to be in the period of radiation, as far as I can see, because the word "can" is used. But in the future, there may be new forms of individualization, and of course the full development of such types would occur much later. So far, the latest to individualize, as far as I really understand, are those from Atlantis. But maybe there will be others who will undergo development in the next full round and will individualize in the later root races of this round. So we'll remain open to more light on that subject. It is well to remember that the soul who came in incarnation in old Atlantis individualized upon that chain which we call the moon chain. Now, this is very important because so many Lemurians were already there on our Earth globe and in our Earth chain. But at a certain point, and it was in the second subrace, and to a degree maybe the third subrace of the fourth root race, that those who individualized upon the moon chain actually came into fourth chain expression, and into expression on our fourth globe. So this was a period of unfoldment so much earlier than that of our Earth that we know nothing about it. And when he says we, maybe he's speaking of humanity in general. I wonder, the masters certainly know something, I would say. Do know something about this. Sometimes I recall, haven't really read it carefully, but in some of the books by Leadbeater, he seemed to be describing, probably, from a psychic perspective, what life was like on the moon chain. Well, was he accurate or not? Was it fanciful? It was interesting, as I recall, a brief exposure to it. So these egos, therefore, did not individualize on our Earth at all, or at least on our dense planet. They, of course, individualized in the Earth scheme, but in a different chain and on a dense physical globe. But came into our cycle of evolution as human beings. In other words, already individualized. See, how do I do this? Already individualized, ZD? No, not really. Well, I'm just going to have to. I know I have this down correct. This abbreviation. No. Well, individualization, individualized. We'll just do it that way. I'll rediscover what it is at some point here. I don't like to waste time looking for abbreviations, which are supposed to save me time. Okay, so came into our cycle of evolution as human beings of a low order, as far as the lowest of our present humanity is concerned. Very interesting, because some of our present humanity is quite, what can we say? Quite primitive, relatively, but all have at least one petal open or opening, something of that nature. Maybe not fully opened, but one petal opened. I think the DK says it. So think of it, there in early Atlantis. So all this was in early Atlantis, that these moon chain types came in. Did they have a petal opening? At least one opening, at least one, and some of them much more. But I think he's talking about the average. But they came in somewhat higher or more advanced than the egos which individualized upon ancient Lemuria. So let's just say that if in those days it was probably pretty much still the first petal was being worked upon. First petal was being worked upon in those early Atlantean days. See, because the lowest of our present humanity has only one petal open, the lowest. Maybe there's some work on the second petal. So if they came in lower than the lowest of our present humanity, they had to have only one. And yet such souls as the Buddha, who came in, had already achieved nearly the third initiation. In fact, he was ready for it. And that would mean all 9 petals of the Egoic Lotus, if the Egoic Lotus was constructed then as it is now, and I think so, he would have all 9 petals open. So I think DK is talking about a certain type of average humanity that had individualized on the moon chain and had not developed anywhere near as far as the Buddha, who I do believe actually really individualized not on the moon chain but in the earlier solar system, because they say that the seeds of the earlier solar system ripened in him, and it's been always my impression that the Buddha was an example, a high example of first solar system or previous solar system or first major solar system humanity. So they came into our cycle of a low order, but it seems to say that in early Atlantean times that the Lemurians were largely working on that first petal. Now remember, it can take millions of years to unfold those first few petals, and during the Atlantean ages or period, the second petal was being organized, stimulated, organized, worked upon, and gradually unfolded. I mean, so many of our modern humanity, even the bulk, have pretty much just the first 2 petals unfolded while working in the third. So it's all very slow when we're dealing with the third aspect of divinity. Even third aspect stars take a lot longer to develop and last a lot longer, actually, than those that are developed on the second aspect or the first aspect, at least according, blending with what the astronomers are saying with what occultism seems to be saying. So it always intrigues me, how low was this order when in race 4.2 or maybe 4.3 this group came in. I think of 4.3 because the moon chain was the third chain, and the individualization occurred there in the third round. I guess it never completed its rounds because it was destroyed before that. How many rounds were completed? When did destruction come exactly? Was it in the 5th round? I'll have to check on that. These are some of the occult technicalities, and maybe DK leaves it to us for inference to a degree. We'll state certain things which we can seize upon using correct inference and maybe come up with a correct answer. It might be of interest here to note that the Christ was the first of our Earth humanity to achieve the goal, and I guess that must be mastership, whereas the Buddha was the last of moonchain humanity to do so. So there were many before the Buddha, apparently, of moonchain humanity who had achieved the goal. But what is the goal? Because, well, this is interesting, because the Buddha on the moonchain did not even achieve the 3rd degree, but with the Christ took that 3rd degree in a 4th ray ashram in Atlantis. So the goal is not being discussed as being achieved on the moon chain by the Buddha. It is rather maybe that the Buddha is the most recent of a series of developed moon chain humanity to achieve a high goal in our system. Let me think about that, because the goal was not achieved in the previous chain. The Buddha was ready to take the 3rd degree, we are told, but did not, because opportunity was not offered to do so. Although I do think that at an earlier time, some were able to take the 4th degree in an earlier phase of the moon chain. Anyway, there were all kinds of developed human beings, far more developed than the Buddha. But the Buddha is one of our current world teachers, and he, let's just say, of all those from the moon chain who achieved the goal, he was the last to do so, or maybe the most recent to do so. As far as the development of these 2 sons of God was concerned, so rapid was the development of the Christ that in Atlantean days he found himself upon the path of probation, as did also the Buddha. And that would mean that in Atlantean days, now we're told they took the first initiation in a fourth ray ashram in Atlantis. So the path of probation means that there was the opening of at least partial opening of 5 or 6 petals. Maybe not complete opening, but that is quite advanced when you consider where most people are, even those who come from the moon chain, where they are today. So at a certain point in this Atlantean development, all 9 petals had to have been open for both the Buddha and the Christ, and it was in Atlantean days. Was it in the 4.5 period? Well, they did take the third initiation at a certain time, but then think of the when did the Buddha achieve the 4th degree? We know, or we have every reason to believe, that the Christ achieved the 4th degree in Aryan times as Krishna in around 3000 BC, about 5,000 years ago. So that's a long time, because Atlantean days were millions of years ago. So a very, very long time seemed to span, at least for the Christ, the difference between taking the 3rd degree in a 4th ray ashram and taking the 4th degree, I presume, in a 2nd ray ashram in Aryan times. As for the Buddha, probably it's not clear when he took the 4th initiation, nor even when he took the 5th, because from the year 25, well, from the year 3000 on, since the span of a bodhisattva is approximately 2,500 years, and since he gave up that role in around the year 500 BC, he would have had to have already been a 5th degree initiate in the year 3000 BC, because you can't be head of the hierarchy, as he was for 2,500 years, and not be a 5th degree initiate. Well, all of these are intricacies. Maybe one day when we can get into those libraries and read the record and have it stated in no uncertain terms, we will not have to follow the path of speculation as I am doing now. But this path of speculation is, after all, it does exercise the mind and its relation to the intuition. It may be correct or incorrect, but at least there is exercise, and it prepares the mind to be more acute. So here's the Christ finding himself with a number of petals open in Atlantean days, and maybe in later Atlantean days he takes the 3rd initiation, and the Buddha as well. So the Buddha, of course, and this has to be really contrasted, because the Buddha was ready for the 3rd initiation at the when the moon chain was destroyed. So that means 9 petals, apparently. And yet he's spoken of as being on the path of probation in the earth chain. Unless the 3rd initiation in moon chain days was of lesser demand than during the earth chain. So that would be really the only explanation, because in moon chain days, to take the 3rd initiation, it would seem that 9 petals would have to have been just about open. But the path of probation in our particular regime doesn't require 9 petals open at all. It pretty well requires only 6 somewhat open, and only somewhat open, and maybe some stimulation or organizational development in the 7th petal. So there are, when you start to put all this information together, there questions do remain, but we do know that as the attention of the Logos is focused on each successive chain, the requirements for initiation do rise. So this will have to remain one of those apparent inconsistencies, how the Buddha, and I'm just really now discovering it, how the Buddha would have 9 petals open in moonshane days and yet simply be on the path of probation during Atlantean days, which requires fewer petals open. Well, maybe, and it would seem to me that when lotuses of certain kinds come into a new system, or a new chain, or a new globe, they pretty well retain what they had achieved in previous. Well, here I am talking about it. Maybe it'll be clarified in a little bit. He, the Buddha, coming into incarnation from the moon chain, having been held in what the occult teaching calls pralaya all that time, and is not a state of inactivity but of learning, entered upon the probationary path a very short time ahead of his brother the Christ. Well, let's just say at least the kind of path of probation which the earth chain and earth globe offered, which may have been higher than that offered on the moon chain. So the Christ was working his way forward from Lemuria, and the Buddha entered the probationary path for our earth globe before the Christ achieved it. And this has to have been in relatively early Atlantean days, I would say. In relatively early Atlantean days. From the angle of evolution, the rapid unfoldment of the evolution of Christ was, as has been stated, from the angle of evolution, the rapid unfoldment of the evolution of the Christ was, as has been maybe mentioned or told, totally unparalleled. It's a bit like the development of Venus, Christ and Venus have a great parallelism between them, even though vastly different in scope of development. But there's a parallel, and the Christ's development has been unparalleled, and I think when we may look at planetary development in our solar system, we will say that the development of Venus has been totally unparalleled, inasmuch it seems to be the only planet which has really completed, or just about completed, its type of unfoldment, unfolding in 5 rounds rather than the usual 7. It has never been duplicated, though there are people living today upon the planet who are beginning to develop now with equal rapidity. Okay, so the Christ has been evolving, through these millions of years, but until our modern Aryan times, no one has duplicated his feat, and only now is it possible to develop with equal rapidity, but not earlier. So they have a background of slow individual development. Now, what stage are they at? Probationary path, and developing now with equal rapidity to how the Christ developed when he was on the probationary path? Anyway, so many of us, we have this background of slow individual development. And possibly because we are behind because of the moon chain disaster, this is, our development is now being accelerated. I mean, who are these people? Are we among them? Who knows? But we do know we seek the acceleration of our development at this time, and we are being given the methods whereby that acceleration can occur. This rapidity is, however, a different matter altogether, for many of the disciples today came into this earth evolution from the moon chain, where already much had been unfolded. When we say much, we want to know how many petals, because see, if those coming in from the moon chain, there must have been a lot coming in from the moon chain, who were relatively primitive and were of a lower type, than even the unfolding Lemurian humanity. And yet the people we're talking about now came in not in a state of low unfoldment, but where much had been unfolded. Maybe, I don't know, maybe a few petals had been unfolded. So you see, if you read between the lines here, with what Master DK is telling us, there's all these different varieties of types, and they come in different ways. Maybe the bulk of the moon chain types, who still will not be fully unfolded until I think even the next round, or maybe it's the next. I think it's the next round. We'll determine that. The bulk came in a condition of lesser unfoldment than even the most primitive of modern man. So, and some of modern men are indeed relatively primitive when you consider the long span of evolution and what it can lead to. So we have some coming in with some petals unfolded, and they are not necessarily, they are the ones who are maybe the disciples today, but not the average moonshainer, who is not necessarily excessively developed. So their rapidity is different from that of the Christ. His still remains totally unparalleled, as these who came in from the moon chain have not worked up to their present point from Lemurian times as the Christ has done. So even though they may be moving as rapidly as the Christ, they have had an advantage. So even these developed moonshainers have had a longer period of development antedating their present development than has the Christ. And of course he's done it through the power of love in this second solar system, with its soul ray being the second, its personality ray being the second, and on our planet, the soul of the planet being the second. The Christ has been in strict accordance with some of the deeper energies of our planet and solar system, so he was not attempting to use the older methods to unfold. In fact, he was using the love method, which sped him along the path. It may seem, that when you stop to help others through the agency of love, that you are delaying yourself. I mean, this was the big question of Hercules in the Gemini labor. He's eager for those golden apples of the Hesperides, and yet he sees that Prometheus is in trouble, and he stops out of love to help, and then he sees that Atlas is in trouble, holding up the world, and he stops to help, and lo and behold, the apples roll into his hand much faster than they would have if he had not stopped to help out of love. So there's a lesson there for all of us. Appearance may tell us that we're not progressing as rapidly when we cut our activity level and enter into loving helpfulness, using a different mode of expression, the second ray. But in the last analysis, the history of the Christ proves that we have been an illusion when we think that activity is a more rapid method of progression than love. So that's something for all of us to really take deeply into consideration. So much is given in this little section. I'm glad I did go over it. I'm maybe not like my friend Lawson going to go through the entire book of Esoteric Psychology, but I want to hit some of the areas where that give us a good foundation for discussing the Egoic Lotus. Okay, so anyway, we have looked at different types that have individualized in different places, and we've had individualization on the moon chain in early Lemurian days, and then in early Atlantean days, and even we find the lights that ever shine, and it may be that there will be individualization still in our race. That's kind of, because the door to the of the animal kingdom into the human kingdom has been stopped, blocked, except, we learn in a very obscure little reference, except for some of the very higher animal types. So will this be the kind of individualization of the sixth-ray race types? I don't know. There are some enigmas there. Maybe my mind will clarify on the subject at a certain point. But when you're doing a book in this manner, you might not have chance to sort of pause and wait for your mind to clarify. You have to keep moving. So maybe someone else will have to clarify this for me and for us. Just how and why egos come into our planetary evolution from earlier cycles and from other planetary systems is a subject of the greatest interest. And actually, he has dealt somewhat with this interesting subject, even in the treatise on cosmic fire, when he talks about, the primary lotuses and the lotuses from Venus and from Jupiter. But it is of no real importance to the students of this treatise. Maybe to the cosmic fire students it is of more importance. We shall not therefore consider it or deal with it. That doesn't mean that he doesn't deal with it, because some of it has been at least hinted at in the earlier large book. It is of a speculative nature and utterly past their possible corroboration or capacity to check. Well, sometimes, yes, that's true, and sometimes a speculation has about it the ring of truth. But still, one doesn't know. So even if a speculation has the ring of truth, one still does not know whether it is true. There is no standard of comparison, nor can they judge by inference what is important. Maybe he's warning us off the very things that we're doing right at the moment. All that can be said is that the three major monadic types came into being. And this is a very important sentence. Because we're not just talking about egos, we're talking about monads as egos. The three major monadic types came into being either from the moon chain or during the Lemurian stage of individualization, and that these three determine much of what is transpiring today. Now, we do know there are 7 monadic types, and of them 3 major, and the 3 major may be even on a higher level than the 7 monadic types, making a 10 altogether. So, if I were to look at, that's one of those, well, there we have a little music going on at the conference. I said, who is that old man with that lovely young person? But anyway, that's not the one I wanted to show you, obviously. I want to get into my references in cosmic fire. Okay, let's just see if I can do this. Computer, and okay, this is Fellowship of Cosmic Fire, and these are the diagram references, which, if opened, and gosh, now maybe I forgot what I'm even looking for here. Well, anyway, we're yeah, I remember now. So we're over here, and we see the 7 and the 3. Well, these are planetary logoi and aspects of the cosmic logoi, a kind of cosmic logos. In other words, the 3 persons of the Trinity, but also the monads have their home in these 3, in these 7, and in these 3. At least I believe the monad has its home not only in the 7, but in the 3. So that's a good graphic for us to understand. For us to understand how the 3 and the 7 might be related. So the 3 major monadic types came into being. And he's pretty well talking about these three major, what the 7 subsidiary types mean, and when they came into being, or if they came into being even before this. That has to remain somewhat speculative. So anyway, they came into being, and what do we mean by being? They came into incarnation as egos, with personalities. It seems that I've been having the hiccups lately. I seem to be talking too rapidly. So maybe that'll slow me down. So they came into being either from the... I'll just have to call it for a minute. Right, hiccups gone. Okay. So it means that when it says that egos came in, what it really means is that monadic types were coming in. We're not talking about necessarily soul rays on 1, 2, and 3. And why is that so? Because at first, when there is individualization, there can only be soul ray types of 4, 5, 6, or 7, and personality types of 4, 5, 6, or 7. The DK clearly states this, and I could go running for the reference. I'm tempted to. If I don't find it immediately, I'm not going to go for it. But I think it's either going to be. Let's see if it's page 570. Well, maybe a better way to find it is to go into these AAB extracts and let's just see 4, 5, 6, 7. Do we get anything there? Is there anything that comes through there? I'm not sure. Yes, well, maybe so. Maybe I did it the right way. Here it is on page... Okay, during these earlier periods, all human beings were conditioned by the 4 rays of attribute, both as souls and as incarnated persons. They were upon one of these 4 rays. All right, so that's page 560, not 570, where I was looking. And let's see, maybe these are all the same references. Yes, they are. Possessing today the Lemurian, every human being in the early stages of his development in ancient Lemuria or Atlantis, or possessing today the Lemurian or Atlantean state of consciousness. There are many such. Okay, so we have these 4 rays only, either as souls or personalities, and that means that there were no methods of individualization which involve the creating of first ray, second ray, or third ray souls. You always come in as a 4, 5, 6, or 7. Okay, where are we? Nope. Maybe here. All right. So what is important here is when we discuss that the 3 major monadic types came in, we're not talking about the first ray, second ray, and third ray egos, but of monads, okay? Even though he may use the term ego, because it's impossible that it be an ego, because unless there was high development before on the moon chain, the great bulk wouldn't have that, because changing to the first, second, or third ray on the egoic level, on the soul level, does not occur until a stage of a relatively high intelligence is met, and for the second ray soul and first ray soul until the period of the excuse me, until the period of the first initiation is approached. So all that can be said is that the 3 major monadic types came into being either from the moon chain or during the Lemurian chain of moon chain are during the Lemurian stage of individualization, and that these three determine much that is transpiring today, such as the problem between capital and labor and all that. But that's as much on the soul level as anything. All that is here possible to do is to give some information which may throw light upon the subject and color our general thought, give us a predisposition to think in a certain way which is in the direction of accuracy, perhaps, but which it is impossible either to check or accept as being inferential or possible. So DK is probably quite sure of what he knows here, but he's really realizing the stage at which human development actually exists and what the human mind can actually do at this time. All this can later be determined by the student when his knowledge and powers, the various cities and capacities to detect, are greater than they are at present and are adequate for the purpose. And of course, his are adequate, and therefore he knows, but he doesn't want to. He's giving us information, he says, but look, you can't check it, so you can accept it and work with it. The three major types are, as is well known, those of will, of power, and will or power, of love, wisdom, or of active intelligence, and the following facts, and he calls them facts. So he's quite sure of what he's saying, right? Even though we cannot corroborate and can only infer, must therefore be remembered that egos of all types individualized on the moon chain, but that the egos of active intelligence constituted 75% of the total, the remaining 25 being divided between the other two. Now, when he says all types, he really should be talking about 7 types, shouldn't he? But he seems to be confining himself to the 3 major types, and he just mentioned 3 major types of monads. So he seems to be saying that of those that came in to our chain, they individualized on the moon chain, but they're here with us. There are, and this is how I would interpret it, 75% of whatever number it was would be third-ray monads of active intelligence, and 25%, or maybe 12.5% each, of first-ray monads and second-ray monads. I think I'm talking majorly about the 3 major types of monads and not the 7. The fact that there are 7 types of monads complicates it, and, maybe these 7 are listed somehow under the major 3. I mean, it could be that the 5th ray monads are listed under the 1st ray, and also the 7th ray monads listed under the 1st ray, that monads of the 4th ray or 6th ray might be equally divided and listed under monad number 2 and monad number 3. The reason I say that is, at least in terms of souls, 7th ray souls become 1st ray souls eventually, and so do 5th ray souls. 6th ray and 4th ray souls become either 3rd ray souls or 2nd ray souls. So maybe it is similar in terms of the monadic absorption by the higher 3 types of the lesser types. This is, of course, strictly speculative. Though we're not talking any more about what's going on the moon chain, because in a way, nothing's going on the moon chain. The moon chain, in a way, doesn't even exist. The Saturn chain has taken its place. But we're talking about those who are now on the Earth and have individualized on the moon chain. And when the word egos is used, as you see, well, all right. It is possible that third ray egos did exist on the moon chain, and second ray egos as well. But he is talking, I think, about monadic types, whatever the egoic type might be. Because they did individualize on the moon chain, all the ego types are possible. But because he seems to be talking about the first three and has mentioned the three monadic types, for me the word ego might as well mean monad in this particular context. He may even be dividing the way he uses the word ego, because, there are 7 types of egos, no question about it, and yet 3 major types of monads. So as I interpret this particularly, since these types are not individualizing on the earth chain, they already have a soul ray type. And but since they are not, by and large, very highly developed, that soul ray type is probably 4, 5, 6, or 7. Because we remember how low they were when they came in, the bulk of them. So you're not going to get an ego, a soul of ray 1, 2, or 3 coming in at a stage of low development that's only achieved at a stage of high development. So because he talks about basically active intelligence and the other 2 types, it's my impression that we are speaking of monads here with egoic types of 4, 5, 6, or 7. Look, even the Buddha coming in from the moon chain in a highly developed state was a ray 4 soul. So it seems to me, and this is clarifying in my mind at this point, that because the bulk of those coming in from the moon chain were less developed even than the primitive types of today's world, the primitive human beings of today's world, that they were largely on the 4, 5, 6, or 7 in terms of the ego, right, the soul. But monadically they were 1, 2, or 3, at least principally 1, 2, or 3. What we do with the 7 monadic types in this context remains to be seen. That in Lemurian times, the egos of love, wisdom preponderated. Well, it's got to mean monad. And why is that? Because in Lemurian times, in speaking of those who individualized on our planet, they can only individualize with soul rays 4, 5, 6, or 7, and not with 1, 2, or 3. So if we're talking about love, wisdom in those earlier days, we're not talking about the soul per se, we're talking about the monad. So the large number of second ray monads, 75%, and the remaining 25 being egos of active intelligence. Remember, I did discuss the monadic auric egg. The word egg and ego really are correlated, so that when we use the word ego, which is interesting in Greek, one thing I salvaged from ancient Greek, ya ego, it means I am. It has to do with the identity of the person within the auric egg. So as the monad has an auric egg, it can be called an ego, an ego. So in Lemurian times, the egos of love, wisdom preponderated, and in their turn constituted 75%, while the remaining 25% being the egos of active intelligence, and very few indeed, practically a negligible number, individualized along the line of power or will at that time. What does the word negligible mean? Well, when we're talking about billions of possible units, a negligible amount might still be quite a large amount, and only negligible in comparison with that larger number. Well, we cannot yet read in the Hall of Records all of these things. It does kind of make you want to have all knowledge on the 3rd level of the atmic plane, and it's really not all knowledge at all. It's probably just all knowledge with respect to our particular globe. And then, of course, you wonder, well, then he's differentiating knowledge from something else, because there are still higher subplanes on still higher planes. And what is going to be impressed upon us there? Do we call it knowledge, or is knowledge simply a technical term? But anyway, we are in the realm of knowledge because we're talking about, concrete numbers and so forth. So in my way of interpreting this, because you cannot have souls of love, wisdom in Lemurian times when only, by and large, the first initiation is being taken, and no moon chain lotuses have been coming in yet, you cannot have their quality being ray 1, 2, or 3, only 4, 5, 6, or 7. So when he talks about love, wisdom, and active intelligence, he's got to be talking about monads. And then, of course, the first ray monads, who are not numerous in our present system anyway, on our present planet, and will be more numerous in the next solar system, which will probably have a first ray personality, i.e. the solar logos will probably, in my view, have a first ray personality. There was a very large influx of individualizing egos, and that's what he seems to be talking about all the time here. We're not talking about moon chain types. They did not individualize here, but in Lemuria they did, a large number. And yeah, and then, of course, in Atlantean times, early Atlantean times, a large influx of individualizing egos, which means they had to individualize on rays 4, 5, 6, or 7, and they were practically all of the power type. Well, unless you know those references, which tell you that, well, you know, as I was saying before, maybe I don't need to go there again. But I feel compelled. All right. During these earlier periods, all human beings, all were conditioned by the 4 rays of attribute, both as souls and as incarnated persons. They were on one of the 4 rays. Well, that's point blank. You just can't get it clearer than that, can you? So basically, he's telling us that the egos in those days, and we are talking about those early days, were simply 4, 5, 6, or 7, so we can't talk about them as being on the power type. We can only talk about monads being on the power type, right? Am I making my point? Am I beating a dead horse? Am I emphasizing it overly much? All right. There was a very large influx of individualizing egos in early Atlantean days, and they were practically all of the power will type, even though, remember that there are not so many of them in our solar system. The figures that we are given of 20 billion third-ray monads, 35 billion second-ray monads, and 5 billion first-ray monads pretty well relate to our solar system and cannot necessarily be considered the numbers that relate to our planet. Although there is a numerical discrepancy, which I've sometimes pointed out, as approximately 6 billion human beings are in incarnation now, and 6/7 of any group that's in incarnation will be out of incarnation. You multiply the number 7 by 6 and you get 42, implying 42 billion or so monads connected with our planet. And if there's only 60 billion, when you add together 20, 35, and 5 monads in our solar system, you only get 18 billion left, and it doesn't seem like very much. It's as if the Earth is absorbing all the monads, which doesn't seem quite right. But then we don't really know about those things. So he definitely does tell us that the 60 billion monads that are human, 140 billion being Deva monads, but we're not talking about that now. He talks about just the 60 billion in our solar system. How many of them are expressing on our Earth? Certainly not all the monads that are on our Earth are not in incarnation. That's obvious. So many more are out of incarnation. So, well, you know, we have one of those number problems again, which all knowledge would solve, right? Okay. Remember Master R with his third ray monad, when he was Francis Bacon, said, "I take all knowledge as my province." What an amazing thing to say, and he meant it. So there was a very large influx of the will and power type of monads. It might be stated that 80% of those who entered human evolution at that time were egos who were expressing the will aspect of deity. Now, notice that's pretty tricky, because the ego can express the monadic quality. So, he's blinding in a way here by using, in my view anyway, using the same word for two different things, ego relating to soul and ego relating to monad. And I already justified why the term ego can be related to the monad. So they entered and they became egos in the soul sense at that time, and they were expressing behind them the will aspect of deity and the remaining 20% along the line of love, wisdom, and meaning that already the entire group of active intelligence monads who were going to be entering our Earth evolution on this fourth globe were already in, and had been in since, they'd been in since Atlantean times. They hadn't yet come in when the individualization here discussed was occurring, but they came in later, already fully formed. Well, not fully formed, but formed. Already came in as soul egos, you might say. So these all, namely the Lemurian individualizing egos and the Atlantean individualizing egos, these all, with the egos which individualized on the moon chain and which came in steadily, and we have to ask, after 4.2 or 4.3, certainly 4.3 was involved, definitely. I mean, because the numerical resonance is there. The third, the third sub-race correlating with the third chain, the moon chain. So there would be an open door for that type of influx. These all, with the egos which individualized upon the moon chain and which came in steadily as the planetary conditions fitted them, until the final stages of the Atlantean period. Amazing. I never read this before. Well, how many times have I read it? But I've never read it before. So, yes, what we have is moon chain. Let's see if I can get this here. Moon chain egos continue to come in until the final stages of the Atlantean period, even 1 million years ago. And we even have Atlanteans with us now in terms of their consciousness, but maybe not the Atlantean races so much, but we do have some. I mean, there's an overlap here, because if you look at the Oriental group, they're considered to be the seventh sub-race of the fourth root race. So what really is the final stages of the Atlantean period? Well, the Atlantean period, let's just say that the Aryan period began in full force 1 million years ago, approximately. So we might use that period of 1 million years ago as indicating what is here discussed. So that they constitute the bulk of our modern humanity. So these all, the Lemurian individualizing egos, the Atlantean individualizing egos, the egos which individualized upon the moon chain and kept on coming in, and that's really important. Maybe it didn't come in as a total influx right there, and that would account for the fact that some of them are not very highly developed even now, if they kept on coming in even up to the final stages of the Atlantean period in the state of development they were in when they were on the moon chain. So all of these constitute the bulk of our modern humanity, plus some rare egos which drift into our planetary evolution for some reason or other, and that word drift is so important. Is it kind of like a magnetic pull? It doesn't sound very purposeful, but yet there is a reason, and never become properly adapted to or fitted to our planetary life. They persistently remain abnormalities. Well, there's a great danger here, and I'm sure you can figure out what it is. Many spiritually inclined but abnormal people will say they are among these rare egos. Yes, that's what they will say. But, it's not so very likely, and there's not so very many of them. Mostly, when we deal with abnormalities, we're dealing with having been maladapted through normal evolution. So, people at a certain stage seek some kind of distinction. They seek to be special, the glamour of being special. Nothing like being a drifting ego, just drifting along into our planetary life from some other planetary life. But the abnormalities that he's talking about are not the kind of psychological abnormalities that we so frequently run into, even among those who are aspiring to be something more. You reach those difficult stages where you're not this and you're not that, and you're acting perhaps a little abnormal. Let's see where we are here in terms of time. All right. 2 happenings of great importance will occur before so very long. The door will be opened for the admittance of rare and peculiar souls who will bring into our world civilization some new aspects and rare and new qualities of deity, though it will not be open for ordinary individualization. This is interesting. Now, that seems to be what he's talking about, maybe, in relation to the 6th root race types. It is, the door will be opened. Now, here is the question. Is admittance individualization? Is admittance individualization? In other words, are these rare souls already developed? Or are they to develop over time with these rare qualities? It seems that it would take an awfully long time for development to occur, and that these qualities would be needed, and our world civilization in the Aquarian Age will need those who are already developed. So maybe he's talking about 2 things, ordinary individualization, no. So ordinary individualization of the animal to the man is not occurring, though I did find a reference tells us that some rare animals may come in, but admittance of souls will occur. But admittance of highly developed and rare souls will occur to enrich our world civilization. So these rare and unexpected types will cause much bewilderment to our psychologists. I guess even now we have on television this kind of funny things about aliens among us, and some of them are kind of, comedic, benevolent aliens, not like the horrific movie called Alien, a horror movie, obviously. But increasingly, as we learn more about the psyche, we're going to see some abnormalities in a very positive sense. We even see them now among certain types of geniuses and so forth. So these rare and unexpected types, meaning a warning for everybody, don't just think because you're having problems with your life that you're a rare and unexpected type. These rare and unexpected types will cause much bewilderment to our psychologists. It should be pointed out that individualization is a crisis and not an unfoldment. It happens all at once, really, and we're told about the tremendous destruction of animal forms which occurred when there was individualization in Lemurian times. The form just couldn't take it and blew apart, or was destroyed, death, and so forth. So it's a crisis occurring at a particular time and not a gradual unfoldment. Though I suppose you have to have unfolded up to a certain point in either in the moon chain type of individualization, because before that you're not upreaching sufficiently towards your spirit aspect for individualization to occur, and if you're not sufficiently unfolded on our own planet and on our own chain, then the solar angels find it of no profit to intervene and implant the spark of mind. So let's just say before individualization, unfoldment, but that individualization itself is not an unfoldment. Before individualization, there is necessarily unfoldment to get ready for individualization. But the act of individualization is more sudden. However long it takes to implant the spark of mind in the kind of individualization in which the solar angels are involved. And, you know, DK talks about a very dramatic period back there in the Lemurian times with storms, firestorms, the destructions of many forms and so forth. And maybe some, you know, among the ranks of disciples now have even lived through those times, maybe not the majority, who are more likely moonchain types or first solar system types. This is of real importance and should be borne in mind in all consideration of this difficult subject, in relation to which so many parts have not been yet discussed or revealed. It is the result of development, but such development need not lead to this particular crisis. Okay, so yes, there is an unfoldment, but what might it lead to then? What causes this crisis in the lives of souls as yet remains as yet hidden in the consciousness of the planetary logos and is only revealed at initiation? Well, you know, one thing that has been said is the opening of the planetary heart center. So when these various planetary logoi are ready for a certain type of heart development, who's to say exactly what type of heart development, then the solar angels, who are hearts of fiery love, they do come in if the round is right and the chain is right, and they ally themselves with an animal form and then begin to create an evolving animal form through the lotus that they have generated and are sustaining. So there are as yet characteristics and qualities of the planetary logos which remain incomprehensible to us. Okay, so he's speaking of individualization in general, but then he's also perhaps talking about what the new types of egos, the rare, unusual types of egos, peculiar souls, and so forth, will bring to us when he talks about, because they will be bringing something from the planetary logos, quite obviously, and they will be representing new qualities which is part of his overall collection of qualities, and these qualities will not have been demonstrating before the time that these new types arrive. When the animal kingdom, viewing it from the angle of the whole and not from the angle of species, has reached a particular stage of development, then there will be an inrush into the planetary life of the energy of all the seven rays simultaneously. Now, does this mean individualization? Because, you know, as we understand individualization, it can only occur on rays 4, 5, 6, or 7. In other words, the soul ray type and even the human personality type that evolves, that appears as unevolved as it is, can only be 4, 5, 6, or 7. But we're looking for the uplifting of the entire entire animal kingdom, and not just the horses, the dogs, the cats, the elephants, you know, the particularly advanced animals. And I don't know what to say about dolphins and some of the seals, some of the sea animals that are apparently very advanced. But at least those types of land animals we are clear about. They are the domestic animals, the dogs, cats, horses, and elephants. Am I leaving anything out? He's not talking simply about those species, but of the elevation of all. And then there will be an inrush into the planetary life of the energy of all the seven rays simultaneously, but what form will those rays take? And will it be targeted within the animal kingdom, or will it have to do with individualization? And if to do with individualization, then why all 7? Unless we're talking about monadic types, of which there are definitely 7. And DK didn't really ever say anything about only 4 of the 7 monadic types appear at first. It is a possibility, of course, because we do have to build the foundation. This occurs very rarely, and the tremendous stimulation then undergone by the sensitive forms of life, and of these the animal was at that time the most sensitive, so now he seems to be going backwards, produced the emergence of a new form, that of infant humanity. So he seems to be talking about the past, and yet he speaks in general as well. How can these 7 ray types rush in simultaneously in the past, except as 7 monadic types? How can the 7 types rush in simultaneously, except as 7 monadic types? Because and I want to say 7 monadic types, because soul rays 1, 2, and 3, 1, 2, 3 are not allowed, or at least don't seem to be admitted. So this occurs very rarely, and the tremendous stimulation then undergone by the sensitive forms of life, and of these the animal was at that time the most sensitive, produced the emergence of a new form, that of infant humanity. Okay, so whether this is the way it always occurs, it certainly did occur in that way at the time of individualization, and we are specifically speaking, I think, of the individualization in Lemuria, and not so much on the moon chain, about which we don't know very much, just a few hints are given. It was the reaction of that kingdom as expressed through its indwelling life, the animal being, who is the informing life of that kingdom of nature, which produced individualization in the more advanced animal man of that time. So a great being, a great kingdom lord, was involved in the individualization process. Well, then, who is the lord of the human kingdom? Did it not really exist before this time? I mean, there's a lord of the kingdom of souls, I suppose. Every collection of beings on any level has its supervising lord, or the aggregate and life of all of the constituents, and so this is the question: when did the lord of the human kingdom emerge? Where was it before man came into being? Well, that's maybe a difficult question, but we do know, we are told there are so many interactions between the Lord of the fifth kingdom of nature, of the fourth kingdom of nature, the human kingdom, and the Lord of the animal kingdom. And they do interact, but the question is, did the Lord of the human kingdom pre-exist the formation of the human kingdom? Well, certainly that human kingdom existed on other planets, but that's just kind of going into regress and saying, well, there was something on Venus, but then where did that come from? Where did that come from in the individualization process? Anyway, there, I think for practical purposes, there is a Lord of the fourth kingdom, and it does interact with that being or Lord of the third kingdom, and so much of what goes on our planet in terms of difficulty has to do, for humanity at least, has to do with the interaction of those two kingdoms, their lords, the composite life. The statements found in occult books that dogs and other animals responded to the divine impulse through an activity of the will or love may be symbolic in nature, but are not correct literally, as so many, there's a little humor here, so many devout occult students may think. I think DK is saying that devout students belong in the church rather than in scientific occultism. So at that time, it wasn't about dogs. Really, it was about a animal man of the period. That some references say was a large ape-like figure, colossal in size, and that was the being who responded, particularly through the response of the Lord of the Animal Kingdom to the coming stimulation of the planetary logos. Such specific forms of life did not exist in those far-off times, particularly upon the moon chain. So we're also talking about a kind of individualization which occurred on the moon chain, and there were no solar angels to engineer this. So on the moon chain, the incoming 7 rays must have been monadic rays, certainly. Because while there were 7 monadic types, the solar angels were not involved in that individualization process. So maybe when the animal kingdom on the moon chain, however amorphous its forms might have been, reached the sufficient stage of potential responsiveness, in rushed the influence of the 7 monadic types. Such specific forms of life did not exist in those far-off times. Well, we're talking about times. Suppose we stop talking for a moment about the moon chain and think about the earth chain. Well, maybe he is also talking about the earth chain. And if he's talking about the earth chain, we're just talking about 21 million years ago, and apparently very specific forms of life existed many more million years ago before that, reptilian, amphibian, fish, and so forth, but not perhaps among the mammals that were ripe for the creation of man. The consideration of species and of types may not be permitted. It is futile and a waste of time. So it's, becoming too specific about the forms of those ancient days will take our attention away from the general consideration that individualization was a great event, it did occur, has been the mainspring of our development as a human race, whether occurring on the moon chain or the earth chain, and we are propelled from that point forward into further development. Well, and maybe one day for specialists who are involved in supervising the development of animal forms, there may be research which is not profitless, undertaken through the study of the records of the planet, the Akashic records. What really occurred was a reaction throughout the entire animal kingdom to the inpouring of the 3 major types of energy, which express themselves through the usual 7 types, and we still may be talking monads here. We still may be talking monads as the 3 major types of monads can be considered distinct from the 7 subsidiary types of monads. So what really occurred was a reaction throughout the entire animal kingdom to the inpouring of 3 major types of monads which express themselves through the 7 types, usual 7 types. That one protection that we have, realizing that we do not have the individualization of first, second, and third ray souls, at least according to the references. So it's not entirely clear whether DK is pinning himself down to discussing moon chain individualization or earth chain individualization, or both. And I'm thinking at the moment it's both. What really occurred was a reaction throughout the entire animal kingdom to the inpouring of the 3 major types of energy, which express themselves through the usual 7 types, and thus called forth response from those forms of life which were energized through the medium of the three major centers, head, heart, and throat, of the being who is the informing life. And this, in other words, these units in the animal kingdom were members of the head, heart, or throat center of the being who informed the animal kingdom. A tremendous surging upward and a going forth in response ensued, which enabled a new kingdom to emerge. Now, you know, and that, of course, is very much the way it was on the moon chain, this surging upward. So, you know, maybe this is more about the moon chain than about individualization on our earth chain. This was true of the moon chain. To what extent was it true of the earth chain and its type of individualization of man? Let's see, maybe he'll say a bit more about this. Let's see, though there's, well, we're nearing the end here, but not on this tape, I think. Not a tape on this program, let's just call it that. We have another 15 minutes, we'll see. So a new kingdom emerged. A creative act is ever the result of inspiration being seized upon, you know, I would want to say here, from the monad, because that's the inspiring source, recognized for what it is and developed by the form side and understood and fostered by the brain and heart of man. That's a creative act for man, but we're talking about a creative act, and in this case, a higher creative act. In this case, a higher creative act, and is developed by the form side. So inspiration descends, whether from the soul or the monad, but in those ancient days on the moon chain, I think inspiration, the divine fire from the monad, and tremendous surging upward of the animal kingdom. That's the one I was looking for, reference I was looking for, and I'm going to just make it quite big. Developed by the form side and understood and fostered by the brain and heart of man. Some new thing is thus produced. The instinctive creative act of the physical body is not here discussed. In this way, through a response to inspiration, the animal kingdom came into being. Animal? Animal. Is this correct? The animal kingdom came into being. Well, is that so? Or should it be human? But maybe in the plant kingdom there was an upsurging. First there was the pouring in of energy, stimulating and inspiring. Then came the recognition of the responding form, resulting in an initiated activity, and there was produced production of that which had not been theretofore. A new kingdom in nature appeared. He does seem to be talking about the human kingdom. Of the human kingdom and not of the animal kingdom. So I'm going to really question that and maybe have to go back to a written resource. There are mistakes, there are typos in the CD-ROM. There are even charts which are put in incorrectly. So why the animal kingdom? It looks to me like the human kingdom. At least that's the way I'm thinking at the moment. The same thing it is, that is, again, happening today in the world. There is a pouring in of spiritual energy, yeah. Well, we're moving from Kingdom 4 to 5, and this is about Kingdom 5. There is a pouring in of energy, vitalizing, transforming, and rendering humanity creative. It's as if these kingdom lords are part of the planetary logos and remain in a state of latency until the form that they need to express through is created, and then they descend. And maybe they are involved in the creating of that form. So we have to think that the fourth the fourth kingdom lord was within the general energy system of the planetary logos, and then found its form or helped to create its form, and then began interacting with the animal kingdom. And a fifth kingdom lord, did it exist before? Well, there certainly was a kingdom of triads, at least, and they are souls. So it's the triad and the animal that are coming together, creating the kingdom of souls, or a new form for the kingdom of souls, and a new type of form for that being that is to become the Lord of the fourth kingdom. There is a pouring in of spiritual energy, vitalizing, transforming, and rendering humanity creative. Initiatory work becomes possible, and a new and higher kingdom can appear upon earth. Okay, is that the fifth kingdom? But all this is due, therefore, to the inpouring of the triple energy in 7 ways. And, that's the 10. The 7 energy, when you have that theory behind you of the 3 and the 7, you begin to see it everywhere. The theory of the 3 and the subsidiary 7, and we're not just talking about souls or egos. So we're talking about monadic types, I do believe. Subsidiary, 7 subsidiary monadic types. The potency of these forces lies behind the disruption of the present time, but a new kingdom in nature will be born, and that is indeed, there are many who are already members of the fifth kingdom, but let's just say a larger representation of the fifth kingdom of nature will be born. And many who are working through the fourth kingdom of nature will move into the fifth and be supervised by a higher kingdom lord. Well, we don't know how all of these different lords work, but there is a table on page, let's see if I do find it, Cosmic Fire. Maybe, I'm going to say, do we go to, is it 533? Maybe, yeah. This table on 533 will give us an example of some of the beings who are part of our system and who we hardly ever think about. And then this other table on 844 certainly will mention Tabulation 6, the Lords of Kingdoms, the life of a kingdom, and so forth. They are very important, and you can get an idea of how these larger beings interact when we normally don't think of them at all. The interest of this, psychologically speaking, well, maybe we're going to finish here, does not lie in the historicity of the facts stated, but in the appearance upon earth today of the higher types at present found among men everywhere. I mean, we human beings, we are evolving. And the ego in us is coming through and demonstrating through its instrument, the personality. Egos of will are relatively and naturally few, and this is so even when that represents soul, egos as souls. Egos of love are becoming more frequent in appearance because the secondary ashram is in, and also in our particular solar system, the monads of love are particularly prominent. But interestingly enough, on our particular planet, and also on Mars and Saturn, it's the monads of the third ray which are more prominent. So even though in our solar system there may be 35 billion monads of love wisdom, on our planet the proportion may be in favor of the monads of active intelligence. At least he seems to say that the preponderance, at least at this time, on our planet. Intelligent egos are widely distributed, certainly on our planet, although maybe not so extensively in the solar system if we consider the word ego to mean monad. There is a balance now being established between egos of love and of intelligence, maybe on our planet, and these together must and will inaugurate the new civilization, which will be the field for the culture of the kingdom of God on earth. So he is talking about our planet. Okay, so we have certainly a lot of monads of intelligence on our planet, just because it is a planet involved with a great third-ray being. But because our planetary logos has a second-ray soul, certainly egos of the second ray would be prominent, and to a certain extent monads of the second ray. We just really don't know how many there are on our planet per se. And we're just talking about our planet. What about our planetary scheme? So the numbers here are definitely blinded. I already pointed out that business about the 42 billion and how that's eating up most of the 60 billion, which is supposed to be in our solar system. 60 billion monads. So, but here, you know, he switches back and forth from egos to monads, and that's the thing we have to look at. And it's not that every time he means ego, you're going to have a big capital E-G-O-S, all caps. It's not going to be that. In Cosmic Fire on page 177, he does seem to do that when he uses that capitalization of the word egos. He does mean triads, and then he uses it in lower case, and it seems to mean soul. So there is an important hint, but generally speaking, if the monad is an ego, he's not going to point it out in any particular capitalized manner. So anyway, a balance is now being established, probably in the planetary economy, between either monads of the first and of the second and third ray, or egos of the second and third ray. There's a lot of the second ray egos coming in at this time because the second ray ashram is there. And as I said, probably in relation to our planet with its second ray soul, quite a number of second ray egos, or those who are destined to be second ray egos, will be found. I mean, we don't know the proportion. We cannot say, okay, there's going to be exactly the same number of souls on, on each one of the rays on our planet. We cannot say that. I'm sure there's a balance in the solar system, and it's all according to design, and I think it would be most unlikely to think that there were equal numbers. So a new kingdom is coming in, the kingdom of God on earth. The coming in of this kingdom will be as much a precipitation of an inner reality as an unseen factor, such as the germ working within the human body. Well, that's a very concrete example. The precipitation and culturing of the germ kingdom is slowly happening, and by this we do mean the fifth, well, how about doing this? The fifth kingdom of nature. So there we are, and we do have maybe a few minutes left, not much. Let me just say that we have gone through pages 200 to 214. We have talked about 5 different types of souls initially. That was how this section began. We have talked about the 10 different soul groups in terms of the development, all the way from the atavistic to the master of the wisdom. And then we've talked about where these different egos, whether as monads or souls, came in, from where, from whence, from where they came in, whether the moon chain, early Lemuria, or middle Lemuria, or early Atlantis, or from other planets, where they possibly, what was the source from which they arrived. And we saw that there is this switching back and forth between the terms monad and soul. Remember, the soul ray is a sub-ray of the monadic ray, and in my view anyway, the secondary monadic ray is a sub-ray of one of the 3 major monadic rays. So it gets a little bit complicated, I think, and naturally Master DK is probably not going to want to speak of all of these differentiations because we could get confused, but he leaves it to us to determine the differentiations if they seem to be indicated. And in order to do that, you just have to look at all of these different books and how the nuggets of knowledge are dropped in different books, apparently far separated, and you have to correlate and bring them together because they will shine light upon each other and give a wholeness to a picture which before was fragmented. So now, at last, this will be the end of Egoic Lotus Webinar Commentary number 5, and page 214, I do believe. Yes, it's page 214. And this will be 2 hours. And we'll go on with the stages of adaptation. Excuse me for slurring my words. It's been an early morning. I got up before 4 o'clock. I said, I've got to work. Okay, so beginning of Egoic Lotus Webinar Commentary number 6, and this will be stages of adaptation, and it will be Esoteric Psychology 1, page 322. We'll be jumping around a bit here. Okay, we're there. All right, friends, this is the end of the 2-hour program, and it is of interest. I hope it's of interest to you. It certainly is of interest to me, and we're laying the foundation for the material which we are going to synthesize when we begin looking at the kinds of things that occur when the different petals are being vivified, stimulated, organized, unfolded, and finally opened up. How we put those terms and what is the last term, whether it's unfolded or opened, remains to be seen. Okay, we'll see you before long with further discussion on the 8 stages of adaptation, which we will correlate with the 10 types of souls. See you then. Bye.